For centuries, Japan existed as an isolated power, fortified by its vast ocean boundaries and a national psychology rooted in its perceived invulnerability. The Japanese High Command fundamentally believed the home islands were beyond the reach of any sustained, damaging foreign attack. This deeply ingrained sense of security was a cornerstone of imperial strategy throughout the early years of the Pacific War. They had witnessed the dramatic expansion of their empire, and the thought of enemy bombers raining destruction on Tokyo or Osaka was considered a distant fantasy. The Pacific Ocean was their greatest defensive moat, a seemingly uncrossable barrier for large-scale, continuous aerial assaults. Even as American forces island hopped closer, the military leadership maintained that any raid would be an isolated, ineffective pinprick easily repelled by fierce defense. Propaganda reinforced this national conviction, portraying the Japanese people as inherently protected and superior to their distant enemies. The very idea of a modern-day foreign invasion, either by sea or air, contradicted centuries of national mythology and history. This dangerous confidence led to critical, fatal flaws in their continental defense planning, particularly concerning civil defense and strategic airbase placement. They focused enormous resources on naval and ground forces to protect their territorial gains, neglecting the deep air defense of their industrial heartland. The defensive perimeter was imagined miles away from the capital, not directly over the emperor's palace or the nation's critical factories. This strategic miscalculation would soon be violently disproven by an aircraft of unprecedented size and range, a flying behemoth they had not properly accounted for. The coming aerial campaign was not just a military action. It was a psychological dismantling of the nation's core belief in its own safety and sanctity. The skies over Japan were about to open up, not with the gentle rains of their summer, but with an inferno of American design and execution. Their homeland was about to become the front line in a total war they had brought to the Pacific world, marking a brutal turning point in their national story. No amount of cultural conviction or propaganda could ultimately stop the machines of modern warfare once they achieved global reach. The era of untouchable island fortresses was ending, heralded by the drone of four powerful Wright R-3350 engines nearing their coast. The nation's long-held sense of geographical isolation was about to be obliterated by the reality of long-range aerial technology. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress represented the apex of American aviation technology during the Second World War, a truly monumental undertaking in its development. This heavy bomber was conceived for one purpose: to wage war across the vast distances of the Pacific theater where conventional bombers simply could not operate. Its design boasted a revolutionary pressurized cabin, allowing crews to operate in comfort at extreme altitudes for missions lasting more than 12 hours. The aircraft featured remote-controlled, computerized gun turrets, a defense system that was cutting-edge and highly effective against the enemy's interceptors. Its most vital feature was its immense payload capacity and its staggering operational range, far exceeding that of its famous predecessor, the B-17 Flying Fortress. The sheer scale of the B-29 program consumed more resources and money than the atomic bomb's Manhattan Project, demonstrating its strategic importance. American industry effectively moved mountains of resources to produce this complex bomber, recognizing it as the key to defeating Japan from the air. Early deployment was hampered by technical difficulties, most notably persistent engine overheating problems that plagued its powerful radial engines. Crews often faced perilous flights over the hump from bases in China, battling mechanical failures and extreme weather just to reach their distant targets. It required advanced staging bases closer to Japan, leading directly to the costly and fierce island hopping campaigns across the Mariana Islands. The seizure of islands like Saipan and Tinian provided the necessary forward positions from which the B-29 could finally strike the Japanese homeland with regularity. These long-range missions pushed the limits of human endurance and mechanical reliability, demanding absolute precision from navigators and pilots alike. The very presence of the B-29 in the Pacific skies was a psychological shock to the Japanese, who watched an enemy aircraft operate with impunity far from their lines. It was an undeniable symbol of the overwhelming industrial might of the United States, a factor that Tokyo had disastrously underestimated from the beginning. The Superfortress was not merely a delivery vehicle for bombs. It was a harbinger of a new era of warfare, capable of projecting power anywhere on the globe. Its very existence shattered the Japanese illusion of a safe and impenetrable barrier protecting their sacred land and imperial capital. The bomber's capacity for destruction was unmatched, setting the stage for the campaign that would follow. The initial B-29 bombing campaign against Japan adhered strictly to the American doctrine of daylight, high-altitude precision bombing, a strategy perfected in Europe. It was believed that flying above 30,000 feet would ensure maximum safety from Japanese anti-aircraft fire and fighters while allowing accurate target sighting. The goal was to surgically destroy key military targets, such as aircraft factories, petroleum refineries, and ball-bearing plants, crippling the Japanese war machine. Unfortunately, the unique conditions over Japan made this European-born strategy fundamentally flawed and mostly ineffective against their targets. Unpredictable and powerful jet stream winds at extreme altitudes caused the bombers to drift wildly, rendering the bombardier's sights practically useless. These high winds buffeted the massive aircraft, making steady, level bombing runs nearly impossible to maintain for the crucial drop moment. Compounding the difficulty was a persistent layer of thick, heavy cloud cover that frequently obscured the industrial targets below. Bombing through the clouds, relying solely on radar, proved to be far too inaccurate to achieve the required surgical precision for which the doctrine called. The results were frustratingly poor. Bombs often missed their targets by miles, falling harmlessly into residential areas or open fields. Fuel consumption at these high altitudes was excessive, forcing the B-29s to carry less bomb tonnage in favor of larger fuel loads for the journey home. The sheer cost of flying such complex, modern aircraft vast distances for negligible results began to raise serious questions in the American high command. The air campaign seemed to be reaching a grinding, frustrating deadlock, with American crews risking their lives for very little tangible military gain. The Japanese defenses, though poorly coordinated, began to gain confidence as the expected wave of decisive destruction failed to materialize as anticipated. A change was desperately needed, an overhaul of the entire operational plan that would finally capitalize on the immense potential of the B-29 Superfortress. The Air Force realized that adhering rigidly to an obsolete doctrine would only prolong the war and increase American casualties without achieving air superiority. This recognition paved the way for a radical, ethically complex shift in tactics. one that would redefine the meaning of strategic bombing in the Pacific. The failure of precision targeting demanded a completely new, far more devastating approach to the air war. The failing precision bombing campaign led to a desperate search for a new leader and a new methodology, culminating in the arrival of General Courtesy LeMay. LeMay was a notoriously hard-driving, uncompromising commander known for his blunt manner and his relentless focus on mission effectiveness. He was transferred from the European theater with a clear mandate to make the B-29 campaign work and to do so quickly, whatever the cost. Upon his arrival, LeMay immediately dismissed the existing high-altitude strategy as demonstrably ineffective and a waste of valuable resources. He observed that the Japanese urban industrial complex was unique, consisting of numerous small, highly dispersed workshops located within dense residential areas. These cottage industries were producing vital components for the war effort, effectively making the entire city a single, massive military target. LeMay theorized that the conventional bombs were the wrong tool for this unique target environment, which was predominantly constructed of wood and paper. His new plan was audacious, dangerous, and morally controversial: to strip the heavy bombers of most of their defenses and fly them at extremely low altitudes. The traditional heavy guns and ammunition that added significant weight were to be removed, replaced with a far greater payload of incendiary bombs. He ordered the removal of the high-altitude engine turbochargers, saving fuel and allowing the aircraft to carry nearly double their bomb load. The plan was a direct pivot from precision destruction to area saturation, targeting the entire city's infrastructure and the morale of its civilian population. The crews were initially shocked by the order to fly at altitudes as low as 5,000 feet, where they would be exposed to intense anti-aircraft fire and interceptors. LeMay famously told his staff that they had been prosecuting the war timidly and that only a brutal, decisive campaign would bring about the necessary surrender. His leadership marked the absolute end of the American illusion of surgical strikes against Japan and the beginning of a grim reality of total warfare. The general understood that the goal was not just to destroy factories, but to utterly break the Japanese will to continue the hopeless fight. This shift was the psychological and tactical precursor to the horrific firestorms that would soon erupt across the island nation's major cities. LeMay's strategic shift represented the coldest form of military calculus applied to the reality of the Japanese war machine. The pivotal moment in the American air war against Japan occurred with the decision to utilize the destructive power of incendiary weapons at low altitudes. The American chemical industry had perfected the M69 bomb, a hexagonal cluster filled with a gelled gasoline mixture known as napalm, a highly effective and sticky agent. These M69s were designed to be dropped in clusters that would disperse hundreds of small, burning units over a massive target area upon release. The strategy involved converting the B-29 from a high-altitude precision bomber into a terrifying, low-level fire delivery system operating under the cover of night. Stripping the planes of their heavy defensive machine guns and armor plates made them lighter, dramatically increasing the number of incendiaries they could carry. This weight reduction also enhanced their fuel efficiency, allowing the massive superfortresses to carry a larger, more destructive payload over a longer distance. The low-altitude approach was designed to bypass the powerful jet stream and the cloud cover that had ruined the accuracy of previous, higher rates. Flying lower and slower under the darkness of night also made the B-29s less visible to the poorly trained and radar-lacking Japanese night fighters. Pathfinder planes would fly ahead, dropping specific target marking bombs to clearly delineate the boundaries of the attack zone for the following main force. The primary target was no longer the individual factory, but the densely populated, highly combustible residential and commercial zones of Japan's major cities. This radical change recognized the fundamental vulnerability of Japanese urban infrastructure, which was predominantly built of lightweight wood and paper materials. The initial test run of this new tactic proved devastatingly successful against the target cities, validating LeMay's brutal, all-or-nothing tactical gamble. The Japanese air defense system was completely unprepared for this shift in tactics, lacking the necessary nighttime interceptor aircraft and ground-based radar. This calculated move from high-altitude precision to low-altitude area bombing sealed the fate of Japan's cities, setting the stage for the coming wave of massive conflagrations. The incendiary weapon proved to be the perfect counter to the unique, flammable construction of the Japanese urban environment. The night of March 9th and 10th, 1945, marked the initiation of Operation Meeting House, the firebombing of Tokyo, a name that would become synonymous with aerial terror. Nearly 300 B-29 Superfortresses took off from the Mariana Islands, flying at altitudes between 5 and 10,000 feet, heading directly for the Japanese capital. The first planes dropped their loads of incendiary bombs onto the designated target areas, immediately creating intense, rapidly spreading fires. As more waves of B-29s arrived, the individual fires began to coalesce and merge into a single, massive conflagration that became entirely self-sustaining. The dense network of narrow, wood-lined streets and houses acted as perfect conduits, feeding the flames across the city with astonishing speed and intensity. This single air raid instantly became the deadliest bombing attack in human history, surpassing even the combined initial casualty counts of the atomic bombs. An estimated 100,000 people were killed in a single night, trapped in the swirling, superheated winds of the created inferno, with many more suffering horrific injuries. The heat was so intense that canals and rivers boiled, and metal objects, including bridges and streetcars, were melted and twisted beyond recognition. Panic-stricken civilians attempted to flee the devastating firestorm, but the fires moved faster than people could run through the clogged, burning streets. Millions of Tokyo residents were left homeless, their entire lives reduced to ash and rubble in a matter of a few short hours of unimaginable horror. This raid specifically targeted the Shitamachi district, a dense, working-class area filled with the very cottage industries that supplied the Japanese military. The psychological impact of the raid on the Japanese government and the civilian population was absolute and profoundly shattering to their national confidence. The realization dawned brutally that their government could not protect them, and that their ancient capital was suddenly vulnerable to complete annihilation. The American strategic gamble had paid off with horrifying effectiveness, demonstrating the full, uncompromising terror of LeMay's new brand of total war. The sheer scale of the destruction in Tokyo was a message that resonated with chilling clarity across the entire Japanese archipelago. The catastrophic success of the firebombing campaign was fundamentally rooted in the unique architectural and urban planning of Japanese cities. Traditional Japanese housing was predominantly constructed from highly flammable materials, primarily wood, paper, and bamboo, due to seismic concerns and cultural tradition. These light, porous structures were designed for quick rebuilding after frequent earthquakes, but they proved lethally vulnerable to incendiary attack. The cities were characterized by extremely dense housing arrangements, packed tightly together with narrow, winding streets that offered no fire breaks. The lack of proper planning for large-scale, modern warfare meant that no effective fire prevention measures or wide avenues existed to stop a raging conflagration. The population density in the industrial and residential districts was among the highest in the world, trapping millions within a lethal, flammable maze. Japanese citizens often stored essential supplies, including fuel and cooking materials, within their homes, inadvertently adding to the combustible fuel load. Their civil defense protocols were antiquated, relying on bucket brigades and small, localized fire departments that were immediately overwhelmed by the scale of the fires. The air raids were strategically timed to take advantage of the dry, windy seasons, which naturally exacerbated the speed and spread of any initial blazes. The B-29 crews often expressed shock and dismay at how quickly the flames erupted and spread across the target area after the initial bomb drops. It was a perfect storm of military tactics and urban vulnerability, a tragic synergy that transformed entire neighborhoods into explosive kindling. The American strategists had correctly identified this critical weakness in the Japanese home front, recognizing it as a target more vulnerable than any steel factory. The military-industrial complex was woven into the fabric of the community, meaning that to destroy the one, they inherently had to destroy the other. This structural reality meant that nearly every city on the bombing list was a virtual tinderbox, waiting for the right moment and the right weapon to ignite. The resulting destruction went far beyond the destruction of war material. It systematically dismantled the entire infrastructure of Japanese civilian life. A firestorm is not merely a large fire. It is a meteorological phenomenon, a self-sustaining, violent atmospheric event created by extreme heat. The process begins when thousands of individual fires merge over a wide area, releasing massive, concentrated heat into the atmosphere. This sudden influx of heat causes the air above the fire to rapidly rise, creating an immense, powerful column of superheated air, similar to a chimney effect. As the air rises, a vacuum is created at ground level, which then violently sucks in the surrounding air from the periphery of the conflagration. This inward rushing wind, sometimes reaching hurricane force speeds, serves to supercharge the fire with a continuous supply of fresh oxygen. The intense, cyclonic winds also carry burning embers and debris, spreading the flames rapidly and unpredictably across any established fire breaks. The firestorm's temperatures are so extreme that nearly everything within its core combustion zone is instantly vaporized or reduced to molten slag. Within the zone, oxygen levels plummet, leading to rapid asphyxiation for those who were not immediately killed by the overwhelming heat or falling debris. During the Tokyo raid, survivors recounted being caught in a swirling vortex of flames, ash, and screaming wind that defied any human attempt to escape. Roads and canals offered no safety, as the heat radiation was so intense that it could kill people even yards away from the direct flame front. The experience of a firestorm was truly apocalyptic, transforming the familiar cityscape into a landscape of utter, indescribable desolation and terror. The American pilots could see the orange glow of the burning cities from hundreds of miles away as they returned to their bases in the Marianas. LeMay's incendiary strategy was fundamentally aimed at triggering this unstoppable phenomenon, maximizing destruction beyond the yield of high explosives. It was the ultimate realization of area bombing, a total defeat of the city's ability to resist the flames, turning its own structure against itself. The firestorm became the campaign's ultimate weapon, a devastating fusion of military technology and the inherent vulnerability of Japanese urban life. Following the successful and terrifyingly destructive Operation Meeting House, the American Air Command quickly moved to replicate the firestorm tactics across Japan. The campaign expanded rapidly, methodically targeting the next 65 largest and most industrialized cities on the Japanese home islands over the subsequent months. Major urban and industrial centers such as Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama, and Kawasaki were all subjected to similar low-altitude, nighttime incendiary attacks. Each city was prioritized based on its population density, the flammability of its housing stock, and its proven contribution to the Japanese war effort. The B-29 fleets became more experienced and confident with the low-level tactics, often flying unopposed as the Japanese air defenses were critically depleted. Japanese resources, already strained by the war, could not produce enough night fighters or anti-aircraft ammunition to effectively counter the continuous raids. The systematic destruction was staggering. By the end of the campaign, over 40% of the built-up area in 66 major Japanese cities had been annihilated. The wave of bombings was unrelenting, allowing the Japanese populace virtually no time to recover or to effectively move their vital industries to safer locations. The constant threat of being bombed made manufacturing production unreliable and reduced the working capacity of the surviving civilian labor force. Refugees poured out of the burning cities into the countryside, creating a massive humanitarian and logistical crisis for the already struggling imperial government. The bombing expanded its scope beyond the primary cities, striking secondary targets and even small towns that housed critical manufacturing plants or air bases. The psychological warfare was just as effective as the physical destruction, as pamphlets were often dropped warning the populace of the next targeted city. This widespread campaign ensured that no Japanese citizen, regardless of their location, felt truly safe or removed from the brutal reality of the American Air War. The objective was clear: to cripple Japan's ability to fight and to force a surrender before a costly and bloody invasion of the mainland became necessary. The experience of the firebombing from the ground was an unprecedented horror that instantly shattered the civilian population's concept of homeland security. Citizens described the sound of the B-29s as a low, persistent drone that brought a terrifying, yet predictable, sense of impending doom in the dark hours. The sight of the burning cities, visible for hundreds of miles, created an environment of constant anxiety and overwhelming dread among the populace. Japanese civilians often had to make agonizing decisions about whether to risk the streets or stay in inadequate home shelters, knowing either choice could be fatal. Many were killed attempting to flee the firestorms, finding all routes blocked by rapidly advancing flames or crushed beneath stampeding crowds. Stories of desperation included people submerging themselves in cisterns or canals, only to be boiled alive by the sheer heat of the surrounding conflagration. The mass graves and makeshift morgues quickly became overflowing, as authorities struggled to cope with the sheer volume of the dead and the horrific nature of their injuries. Despite the fear and the devastating loss of life and property, a significant portion of the Japanese population maintained a high degree of stoicism and dedication to the war effort. The imperial government and military police enforced strict obedience and continued to utilize propaganda to rally the survivors against the barbaric American enemy. Workers often returned to the ruins of their factories to salvage tools and attempt to restart production in the open air, demonstrating remarkable resilience. The government implemented harsh penalties for anyone caught spreading rumors or expressing defeatist sentiments, attempting to maintain absolute control over the narrative. Many citizens continued to honor the ancient Japanese code of honor, believing that suffering and endurance were necessary sacrifices for the emperor and the nation. However, the reality of constant death and destruction began to erode public confidence in the military leadership's ability to protect the homeland. The overwhelming aerial assault created a deep, irreversible chasm between the propaganda-fueled confidence of the military leaders and the brutal reality faced by the populace. The sustained B-29 firebombing campaign achieved two critical strategic goals: the destruction of industrial capacity and the shattering of civilian morale. From an industrial standpoint, the destruction of the small-scale, dispersed workshops had a more immediate and severe impact than the bombing of large, hardened factories. These cottage industries produced essential components like fuses, wiring, and subassemblies for aircraft and other military hardware. The systematic annihilation of these neighborhoods choked the supply chain, paralyzing the assembly plants that relied on their continuous output. The attacks destroyed not only the factories but also the homes of the workers, leading to massive absenteeism and a complete collapse of the labor base. The destruction of the rail networks, power grids, and water systems within the cities further exacerbated the crisis, making any recovery virtually impossible. Psychologically, the raids demonstrated to the average Japanese citizen that the nation's war was now irrevocably on their doorstep, and that no place was truly safe. The government's promise of an impenetrable homeland was exposed as a dangerous, catastrophic lie, eroding trust in the military leadership. Fear became a constant, motivating factor, as people spent countless hours in shelters or fleeing to the countryside, unable to maintain a consistent work schedule. The loss of millions of homes and the scarcity of food and basic necessities created a deep-seated weariness and a growing desire for the bloodshed to finally end. The fire raids served as a brutal, visceral demonstration of the complete technological and industrial asymmetry between the two warring nations. The Imperial War Cabinet began to acknowledge in private that the continuation of the war was no longer militarily feasible due to the industrial collapse. The firebombing campaign effectively paved the way for the later atomic bomb drops by softening the target area and demonstrating America's willingness to escalate destruction. It was a campaign designed to make the continued resistance of Japan an unimaginable proposition for both the leaders and the suffering population. The firebombing of Japan remains one of the most controversial and ethically debated actions of the entire Second World War due to its massive civilian toll. Critics argue that the wholesale, deliberate targeting of civilian residential areas constituted an act of terror and a clear war crime against a non-combatant population. The sheer scale of the casualty numbers from the fire raids is often pointed out as a morally equivalent atrocity to the later use of the atomic weapons. Supporters, however, maintained that the firebombing was a military necessity, a brutal but effective means to accelerate the end of a bloody, protracted conflict. They argue that the dispersed nature of Japan's war industry made the entire city a legitimate military target under the doctrine of total war. Furthermore, proponents contend that the campaign saved countless American and Japanese lives by making a costly, final land invasion of the mainland unnecessary. General LeMay himself famously defended his actions, stating that he would have been tried as a war criminal if the United States had lost the war. The ethical boundary between legitimate military targeting and the deliberate slaughter of civilians was permanently blurred by the low-altitude incendiary campaign. The legacy of the B-29 Firestorms is intrinsically linked to the broader, difficult debate over the morality of strategic bombing in modern warfare. For the survivors, the memory of the night raids remains a deep psychological scar, a defining moment of national trauma and unimaginable personal loss. The firebombing fundamentally changed the nature of war, demonstrating the horrifying effectiveness of modern air power against a pre-modern urban society. The events ensured that the Japanese belief in their island's invulnerability was forever extinguished, replaced by a lasting, painful memory of the nights the sky rained fire. The ultimate justification of the campaign continues to be debated by historians, but its devastating effectiveness in bringing the Pacific War to a rapid, crushing conclusion remains undeniable.